In 1973, America bet $40 million on a high-speed train to save its rails, and ended up banned from ever going fast. The E60 was born from bureaucratic panic, promised as a sleek replacement for the iconic GG1, rushed into service during the oil crisis, and engineered by repurposing a coal hauler into a passenger engine. Test runs quickly revealed a violent secret. At 100 miles per hour, the new flagship shook so wildly it endangered the tracks and everyone on board. Instead of leading a new era, the government's own creation was slapped with a humiliating speed limit. What really happened behind this botched rescue mission, and how did the brick's greatest failure become the ticket to Amtrak's survival? To answer that, we have to start on the Northeast Corridor, the day the old legends began to die. The GG1 was never just a machine. For nearly 40 years, it was the backbone of the Northeast Corridor, a 475,000-pound streamliner with curves like a work of art and a reputation for running day and night, snow or shine. Crews swore by them. Old heads in the yard still remember the way a GG1 hummed along the rails, the cab warm from its own steam, the horn echoing off city canyons at dawn. But by the early 1970s, the legend was falling apart. Welders at Wilmington and Sunnyside spent more time patching cracks than running trains. Some frames had fractures running a foot long. Shop logs from Penn Central showed more than 60 units with structural cracks in a single year. The best ones had already seen 2 million miles. The rest was so tired that mechanics joked they held together out of habit. Every GG1 hid a cloud of asbestos wrapped around its pipes and insulation. By 1973, new safety rules forced crews to wear masks just to check the brakes. The Federal Railroad Administration called out more than 100 safety defects in the fleet, including cracked frames, failing motors, and loose insulation. Availability dropped below 70%, and the old-timers started to worry the next run could be the last. The oil crisis doubled the number of passengers, but the engines that carried them were running on borrowed time. In the shops, the talk was grim. Something had to replace the GG1, and soon. No one wanted to be the last engineer riding a legend into the ground. Gas lines stretched for blocks in the spring of 1973. News anchors warned of rationing. With oil prices quadrupling overnight, the country's highways emptied out and the Northeast's old train stations filled up. Amtrak ticket counters saw crowds not seen since the war years. In a matter of months, ridership on the Northeast Corridor doubled. Trains that had run half-empty for decades now left passengers standing in the aisles. Every available car was pressed back into service, but the aging GG1s could not keep up. Politicians in Washington began holding press conferences on platforms, promising a new era of modern rail. The message was clear. America needed to get off oil and fast. Electric trains were suddenly the patriotic answer. Amtrak's board faced mounting pressure from Congress and the public to deliver results immediately. The usual years-long process of research and design was swept aside. Officials demanded a replacement for the failing GG1s, and they wanted it on the tracks as soon as possible. The urgency of the oil crisis left no room for caution. In the boardrooms, the question was not what the best locomotive might be. It was what could be built right now, using whatever was already sitting on the shelf. General Electric wasted no time pitching their shortcut. With Amtrak desperate and the clock ticking, General Electric salespeople stepped forward in 1973, holding the blueprint for their E60C, a locomotive designed for hauling coal across the Arizona desert. The promise was simple. Skip years of research and custom engineering, and instead take a proven freight hauler and adapt it for the Northeast's crowded passenger rails, the Black Mesa and Lake Powell. E60C had just entered service, moving 80-car coal trains over steep grades at a steady 35 miles per hour. It was a brute, 6 axles, 6,000 horsepower, and a frame that could shrug off anything the desert threw at it. General Electric engineers argued that with a few tweaks, add a second cab, drop in a steam generator for the old passenger cars, and swap the gearing for 120 miles per hour, they could deliver a brand new electric fleet in just 12 months. That was 2 years faster than any European alternative. Amtrak's board, under pressure from Congress and watching the GG1 locomotives fall apart, saw a lifeline. No one wanted to wait 3 years for an import. The sales literature boasted American muscle and rapid delivery. The numbers looked right on paper. A 193-ton locomotive, ready-made for electrified tracks, capable of pulling the heaviest trains in the country. The contract was signed for 26 units at a price tag pushing $40 million. The urgency of the oil crisis made the shortcut irresistible. Officials convinced themselves the freight-borne E60 could be reworked into a passenger champion. The details, the weight, the rigid trucks, the fact that the original design had never gone faster than a city bus were brushed aside in the rush to put anything new on the rails. For General Electric, it was a golden opportunity. For Amtrak, it was a gamble built on speed, not caution. The E60 did not just inherit its bones from a coal hauler, it picked up a suite of passenger add-ons that made it even heavier and more complicated. Engineers stretched the single-cab freight frame to over 71 feet, and they grafted on a second cab so the locomotive could run in either direction without turning around. That second cab alone added several tons to the structure. To keep the old passenger cars warm, a massive steam generator was bolted inside the body. This was not some lightweight modern heating system. It was a full steam boiler, complete with water tanks and piping, wedged into the middle of an electric locomotive. The boiler alone weighed more than 20,000 pounds, and the water supply added even more. The E60 CP variant carried all this extra hardware just to bridge the gap between the old steam-heated coaches and the new electric era. On top of that, the design team swapped out the original freight gearing for a set that, in theory, could push the locomotive to 120 miles per hour. That change meant beefier motors, heavier drive components, and reinforced supports throughout the underframe. Every new system, whether it was for comfort, control, or speed, pushed the final weight up. By the time the first E60 rolled out, it weighed 193 tons, only slightly lighter than the original coal hauler, but far heavier than any passenger locomotive in Europe or Japan. All those modifications were supposed to make the E60 a modern, all-purpose machine. Instead, they created a rolling contradiction, a train designed for speed, but burdened with the mass and rigidity of a freight brute. The contract demanded 120 miles per hour. But the reality was a locomotive so heavy and so stiff that even the smallest curve became a test of nerves. Engineers had built a machine that looked ready for the future, but underneath the shiny paint, it was carrying the weight of every shortcut taken along the way. Test runs on the Northeast Corridor started with high hopes and a fresh coat of paint, but it did not take long for nerves to fray in the cab. The first time they pushed the E60 past 100 miles per hour, the entire locomotive began to lurch side to side. Not a gentle sway, but a violent, unpredictable hunt. Engineers called it truck hunting, and at those speeds, the rigid 6-axle trucks, borrowed straight from a coal hauler, fought every curve and joint in the track. The coffee cup trick became legend. Set one on the control stand at 105 miles per hour, and it would skate across the metal, rattle against the window, and crash to the floor. Inside, the cab felt like a carnival ride gone wrong. Test crew reports described the sensation as being bounced between invisible hands, metal shrieking as the wheels slammed left, then right, then left again. Accelerometer data showed lateral forces spiking far beyond what the rails could handle. Inspectors walking the track after a run found spikes working their way loose, and wood ties splintered where the wheels had hammered down. At 110 miles per hour, the whole train threatened to leap off the rails. One engineer, white-knuckled at the throttle, muttered, "We're gonna derail." The proof was in the numbers and the bruises. The E60 was not just unstable, it was dangerous. Every test over 100 miles per hour turned into a gamble, and word spread fast through the yards. The new brick might be too heavy for its own good. The Federal Railroad Administration did not waste time after the high-speed test disaster. In February 1975, one of the new E60s derailed during a run near Elkton, Maryland. Inspectors pored over the track and locomotive, finding evidence of violent side-to-side movement, freshly loosened spikes, battered ties, and marks where the wheels had slammed against the rail. The test data told a grim story. The E60's rigid six-axle trucks were pushing so hard against the rails at over 100 miles per hour that the track itself was at risk of being torn apart. Within weeks, the Federal Railroad Administration issued an emergency order. The language was blunt. No E60 could operate above 90 miles per hour, effective immediately. The contract had called for 120 miles per hour, but the government's own safety officials decided the new flagship was too dangerous to run at the speed it was built for. Amtrak's proud new high-speed locomotive was now legally slower than the Metroliners it was supposed to replace. News of the restriction broke in the national press. Reporters grilled Amtrak executives and General Electric spokesmen. Headlines called it a $40 million embarrassment. In the yards, engineers taped over the speedometers with a big red 90. The message was clear: this was no racehorse. The E60, built as a symbol of American progress, was now officially a brick with a speed limit. The humiliation was complete. For the railroad, the only thing left to do was figure out what to do with a fleet of banned locomotives. The ban came down like a hammer, but Amtrak wasn't ready to throw in the towel. Shop crews got the order: do whatever it takes to squeeze more speed out of the E60s. The first fix was weight. Mechanics spent weeks drilling holes through the thick steel frames, hoping to shave off every possible pound. They yanked out the steam generators, a relic from the GG1 days, and patched over the empty space. That alone dropped nearly 11 tons from the heaviest units. Engineering memos from the period read like a list of desperate ideas: lighter wiring, thinner panels, even swapping out the cab seats for something flimsier. The numbers added up quickly. Amtrak poured millions more into retrofits, chasing the original promise of 120 miles per hour. Each modification meant more downtime in the shops and more money out the door. Maintenance logs from Wilmington show E60s sidelined for weeks at a time, waiting on new parts or half-finished upgrades. For every ton lost, the top speed barely budged. The rigid trucks, the real culprit, could not be lightened or swapped without a total redesign. After all the effort, the E60s still shook themselves silly at anything above 90. The suits in Washington kept signing off on budgets, but the men in the yard knew the truth: no amount of drilling or tinkering was going to turn a brick into a bullet. Amtrak's patience ran out. After years of throwing money and fixes at the E60, the search for a true high-speed locomotive turned overseas. In 1977, a Swedish import arrived for a test run, the ASE RC4. It was everything the E60 was not: compact and light, and built from the ground up for fast passenger service. Where the E60 lumbered along on 6 rigid axles, the Swedish design used 4 flexible trucks that hugged the rails at speed. The difference showed right away. The RC4 prototype, soon rebranded as the AEM7, sailed through tests at 125 miles per hour without a hint of the dreaded wobble. Coffee cups stayed put, no more shrieking metal or a bouncing cab. Amtrak's procurement team did not hesitate. They signed a licensing deal with RCA to build the AEM7 locomotives in the US, and by 1980, the new fleet was running up and down the Northeast Corridor. The AEM7 weighed half as much as the E60, but it pulled trains faster, smoother, and with fewer breakdowns. Engineers called it the Toaster for its boxy look, but passengers only cared about the speed. For the first time since the GG1, American Rail had a true high-speed workhorse. The E60, once the pride of the fleet, was quietly pushed aside. Its days as a flagship were over. The story of the E60 did not end with the humiliation of the speed ban. Once the AEM7 locomotives took over the fast runs, something unexpected happened. The old brick found its calling in brute force service. Conductors started requesting the E60 by number when a train got too heavy for the toasters. On winter mornings, when the snow piled up and the schedule called for 18-car consists on the clocker or the crescent, it was the E60 that got the nod. Yard crews joked that if you needed to move a mountain, you called in the brick. The weight that doomed it as a racehorse turned out to be a gift for traction. Where lighter engines slipped and stalled, the E60 just dug in and pulled. Engineers learned to trust its stubborn grip, especially on the long hauls down to Atlanta or up to Montreal. In service logs, the E60s racked up miles as the backbone of the heavy trains, sometimes dragging consists so long that the rear cars vanished into the winter fog. By the late 1990s, the brick had become a legend of a different kind. It was not fast, but it was reliable. Crews gave it names like the Clydesdale and the Mule. When the job called for raw power, nothing else would do. The last E60s worked until 2003, outlasting the expectations of nearly everyone who had written them off. For a locomotive built in the rush of crisis and nearly ruined by its own design, it found redemption not in speed, but in sheer, unbreakable strength. Today, America still debates high-speed rail, but the lessons of the E60 echo in every billion-dollar project. Engineering shortcuts and political pressure do not build lasting progress. As Congress weighs new rail investments, the ghost of the brick reminds us, mistakes on the tracks of infrastructure shape generations. The next rush job could cost far more than $40 million. What do you think? Is history repeating itself?